Hi, good to see you.
My favorite namesake. Hey, Paige, could I ask you to just keep monitoring and let people in? That would be great. Thank you. All right. Well, welcome to the July Invite Change Masterclass. This is a series we've been running since January as an opportunity to give back into the community of leaders and practitioners all around the world who have been interested in Invite Change and the generative wholeness work that we do here. I do have a soft spot in my heart for this subject, so Lynn, I'm glad that it was something that attracted your attention. We we're at a really interesting time culturally, cross-culturally, all over the world. This is not a challenge that is unique to the United States. For those of you that might be obsessed with what our government seems to be doing or not doing, depending on your point of view. And it's I think, a very important conversation for our field of coaching, given that we live in a zero geography world. It's one of the only professions that crosses borders all day long, every single day. We're on different continents, and our sensitivity might be heightened, but we are also human, which means we have the same frailties of the clients that we're working with in understanding the ways in which we might think we're creating belonging, but maybe not, and we don't even know it. So let me jump right in. I'm going to have some remarks. There'll be moments when I'm going to ask you to weigh in. You're welcome to do that in any way you're comfortable with. That can be turning your mics on. In fact, you could leave them open. That's totally fine by me. I'm not worried about sound in the background. Or you can use chat, or choose not to reply. That's okay too, right? Manage your own sensitivities to the topics and the questions. We will have an opportunity for you to work a little bit in breakout rooms. I'm hoping to do triads just to give you a little more richness to the fabric of the conversation. We'll come back and do some debrief. And I am going to leave you with a tool that you can use for the breakout rooms, and then, of course, use in any way that you like, that we've called the beginning of a culture audit. No, this is not a validated tool. That's not what we're doing. But in the spirit of the coaching mindset and skill 2.3 in particular, that we need to have an ongoing, and I do mean need, we need to have an ongoing reflection practice. We must commit to finding our own way into our blank spaces that are there because we either learned to turn them into blank spaces or we simply haven't experienced it yet. And without reflection, we don't realize that that's the case. So that's the kind of quick process map for you. I called this the myth of belonging. Chatting with the team here at Invite Change, we were kind of going back and forth with different titles. And one of my favorite leaders in this space, gosh, I think he's been doing this now 46 years or something. His name is John A. Powell. He's at the University of California in Berkeley. And not only does he run the Black and African American Studies, actually, I think they've renamed it to Ethnic Studies Department, but he's also the founder of the Othering and Belonging Institute. If you've not picked up his book, Belonging Without Othering, I would highly, highly recommend it. And you'll see some references to some of his material in our talk today. So I said myth because I think there are many. And I think that trying to be aligned with a singular way of understanding belonging is part of our challenge. And that there is no one truth, there is no one way. Belonging is both subjective and objective. It is highly context dependent. It is very much influenced by our identity in all the ways that you might think about that. And so as a result, I think we, in our desire to want to execute well in this space, we are also excluding. Oh, so not what we're trying to accomplish. So the subtitle probably helps give you a little bit of clue about where we're going today. Why great cultures embrace difference, not sameness. I just um I just decided to go Google a little bit and see what the current statistics are for race in the United States in 2025. Okay, not being US centric, just it's an easy place to get data, not so easy in the other continents. 57.6% are white non-Hispanic. And for another year, we are declining in that category. There are a total of 8 categories of races in the United States. The next category, 19.1%, is Hispanic Latino. And for another year running, it is increasing, and it's increasing at 1.9%. The next is Black African Americans, 14%. Asian is at 7.2, growing at the fastest rate of all of the non-whites at 4.4%. And multiracial, which means two or more, is 3.3%, growing at 2.4%. Okay, that's a whole bunch of math. 46.8 is non-white. So we're sitting in a country where we keep debating diversity, and yet diversity is a fact. This is no longer a thing to dispute. It simply exists. Now, the subtleties of the term of diversity and how it's operating in organizational settings of all kinds, government, profit, not-for-profit, community, religious, it doesn't matter. Where humans gather, we're challenged by finding our way to what a state of belonging feels like emotionally, what our sensory system picks up without words and responds to, because that is the nature of being an animal, and particularly of being a mammal. So there's a lot of complexity, and I'm going to mostly give you some things that hopefully broadens your thinking about this subject. It is a subject I hope I inspire you to want to be with for a long time. Yes, this is a quote from the book I released last year. Tension is not a problem to fix, and boy, do we have tension on this subject. It is a signal that evolution is trying to happen. So thanks for joining us today, because you're telling me that it's catching your attention enough that you're choosing to spend some of your precious time exploring this subject and doing it in community. Here's the 5 areas we're going to look at: fitting in versus belonging. Those of you that are Brené Brown fans, her original work, Daring to Be Great, has some wonderful exploration of the notion of vulnerability, and that fitting in is not belonging. It might be a resource for you. The cost of polite conformity. In other words, what is the impact in organizational life when we choose conformity over connection? And as a result, we provide almost a brake, like your foot's on the accelerator and the brake at the same time, impacting productivity. Psychological safety in action. These are words that get thrown around a lot. I want to see if we can together see this in a more practical way. Humanity, sorry, that should actually say humility, but maybe humanity is right. Humility as a cultural currency, and crafting your culture evolution. So if this was the plane you meant to be on, great, we're taking off. Maybe you all know James Baldwin, an amazing American writer and civil rights activist. He is also in my mind, one of the most extraordinary communicators. He gets to the essence of things so easily. The place in which I'll fit will not exist until I make it. I suppose as a woman leader in corporate, when I complained about being excluded from a meeting, and I was told quite directly, well, just bring your chair. Yes, Shirley Chisholm said that first. And I think this is an important element for us as leaders to consider. Do we make the space for people to step into the contribution they want to make? And I think in some ways, this call to action in his sharing here, I just want you to notice what happened in your body as you read it. Did you say, yeah, right, if only? Did you say, yes, this is exactly what I do and it works? Did you say, I've never considered it, putting those two things together? We often think about being a misfit in some way as a hindrance or a disability or a weakness. When in fact, I think what James is doing is saying, hang on a second, it's just what is. If the place in which I'll fit does not yet exist, I will make it exist, and therefore it will. And this is maybe sounding pithy, but I think he's essentially saying we are wired to evolve. I'm going to come back to this theme a little bit more, but there's so much about being a human. If you think about um, some of you I know have children, so you know what it is to birth a child. Others might have seen pictures of birth being given. What happens? The baby comes out and it goes into the hands of a nurse or a doctor or a doula who clean them up, disconnect them from the umbilical cord, and immediately put them on the body of the parent. We learn connection from the moment we can breathe. We actually do it probably in the womb. There's some interesting debates about all of that. But in the womb, we know that the heartbeats are often synchronizing between the baby and the mother. And so there is something deeply inherent in us as humans for connection. The other thing is to grow. We start growing the minute we come out and probably also start dying at the same time. But we keep this need to achieve and to grow for as long as we're walking in an incarnated body. Just keep those two ideas in mind. Connection and the need to grow are like two strands of DNA in all human beings, regardless of context or identity factor. So here's what I mean about the illusion. Um, it was let me see, 1986 when I did my first, corporate workshop on being more, what did we call it? I think it was being more accepting was the word. And there were like 30 of us in the room. And at some point I raised my hand and I asked, is the diversity of thought acceptable? And I could feel the daggers being thrown at me from the front of the room as if I had said something that was so inappropriate and nowhere in the facilitator guide, and they were not prepared to talk about it. So we were having the discussion because I was in San Francisco about gender diversity. We were having the discussion about racial diversity, and we were having the discussion about what the organization's policy and compliance was. This wasn't about receiving our humanity. And in particular for me, one of the things that I was always challenged by, it took me a long time to learn this because I kept getting negative feedback. I never got feedback about, well, what would I transform into? And that because I was smart, I was scary and intimidating. I'm like, but I don't get that. Don't you want my smart? So conformity was what they were wanting, and it was definitely not connection. They would have preferred my silence, and it didn't end up being safe. There are all kinds of ways that when I chose to be silent, I then was told, "We missed your contribution. You better up your game a little bit." And agreement does not mean trust. But these are things that lots of organizations choose to pursue, I think, at great cost. Now, you might ask yourself, have you ever worked with someone who had the polish, like, the image and the presentation? They seem to be inviting and welcoming. They seem to say the right words, and yet there wasn't anything that followed through. and produce the kinds of opportunities that were equitably distributed, that people had access and they knew how to access, and that there was a fairness into which opportunities and contribution was welcomed. This is what we're talking about. It's complex. And as I was just mentioning, all humans require two things to breathe: connection and growth. However, most workplaces reward image over authenticity. This is what blocks the essential connection. And in some ways, it's quite stunning to me that we have this, well, we have to be back in the office. You know, I spent a lot of time in physical offices. I don't see authentic interaction. What I see is people going around the corner to have an authentic conversation that can't be seen. And so, in some way, leadership thinks that their culture is because of place, and they've completely missed the point. So, we have a lot of work to do, folks. And this inauthenticity, I care about you, so I want you to retain our culture and be in the office, actually is creating stillness. People don't actually have a seat because they've reduced the amount of space available. So people are rotating through seats that are neutral, have no identity to them. And oftentimes, when they want to do an all hands, they don't have enough space for all hands to be there. Mm. So we have this cost of polite conformity. 21% of the global workforce is actively engaged. Oh, I think that if you guys do the math, you'll know that that's 79% not. That's expensive and tragic. And how could we let this happen? 50% are actively looking for new jobs. $438 billion in lost global productivity from disengagement. Now, mind you, I think Gallup's number is incredibly low. SHRM's recent data on incivility in the workplace, 13% of respondents see it every single day, either personally against them or they've witnessed it. And that's $2 trillion is what SHRM's estimate is. And yet we don't seem to figure out how to transform. That's got me puzzled. Just because it's expensive doesn't mean people have what's necessary to make the mindset shift. It is a failure to lead. And middle managers are stuck in the middle. Leaders don't want to hear about it anymore, and the staff has given up. And who could blame them for being a little bit cynical? And in many ways, they might be listening. Managers and leaders both might be listening, but they're not perceiving the consequence of their inaction or their polish without production, where there's no there behind the policies they've articulated. So I want you to ask yourself, when did you last feel seen and not just evaluated? You can think about this in any context you like. I'm going to give you 20 seconds. I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to take the slide down. Just jot a few notes. When did you last feel seen, not just evaluated? And of course, there's the corollary. What does that say? Is the frequency with which you feel or experience or sense you're being evaluated, and the other doesn't seem to want to see you. How often is that occurring? Maybe even let yourself scan for a minute. How often does it occur in my workplace? How often does it occur in my family? How often does it occur with my friends? I actually created a little bit of a kerfluffle. Yeah, that's a Midwest term. Um, I was out with some friends, not deep friends, but local friends around an event that we were creating. And the conversation was going around and around and around, just kind of debating the same thing, like pounding salt. And I finally said, wait a hold it. Can everybody just stop talking for a minute? And I had that same experience of, how dare you stop this? It led to a very useful discussion. And that took a lot of courage on my part because I knew I was going to end up being the outcast for having done it. And yet, at the end of that conversation, everybody realized that they were more attached to the emotional upset that was causing the merry-go-round conversation than they were to a solution. Well, isn't this what happens to leaders all day long? Many of you here on this call are coaching inside of organizational settings, and leaders are like, why are they escalating this to me? They should be handling this. When the right question to ask is, what's in the system that has people prioritize and feel permission to stay stuck in the problem rather than inviting a more generative response to it? Now, I'm not necessarily asking you to answer that question, but I give it to you as some food for thought. The minute we feel that activation to, this doesn't feel right, ask ourselves, what's going on in this environment that has us motivated in this way? And instead of something that would be a little more productive. All right. So, um, obviously I have a birthmark on my face, so I can tell you that visually, exclusion is something that I'm very familiar with. I don't in any way mean to compare it to a lot of very egregious experiences that people have for any number of identity factors that make us different. And in my mind, what I've learned along the way is that belonging is not about blending in. Every time I tried to do that, it always backfired on me because I never was obviously the same. And I think it's quite fascinating that people who feel othered get comfort by othering. I don't think that's our answer either. So, this is one right answer, not the only one, but one that I'd offer you. It's about being welcomed as you are and standing in your truth without compromising another's dignity. I think in some ways we've made it very difficult to get to know what somebody else um, values, what they revere, what's important to them, what has them feel respect, and we don't bother to ask. Wow, that's tricky. What's in our environment that we don't make space for people to say, you know, I identify as a white cisgender woman who grew up in the middle of the United States but has traveled the world. And it's important to me to know what about the way you identify is useful for me to learn so I can be with you in a respectful way. Now, that might sound like coach jargon to the coaches here. And I can tell you that because I have traveled all over the world and I say that to people, I almost always get a smile back. Even the simplicity of saying, please say your first name for me so that I'm sure to pronounce it correctly. These are small acts of acknowledgement that allow for me to stand in my truth and be who I am and ensure that I am doing everything possible to not compromise another person's dignity. So, simply a suggestion, something to noodle on a little bit. There is no one right answer. One of the things that John Powell has always said, the mistake we're making is that we're trying to get to a common denominator as opposed to realizing that everybody starts from a different place. And as a result, if we don't meet them right where they are and make a choice that we are going to walk together to find what alignment is going forward, then we're going to always miss the mark. We don't ever know what another person is all about. And it's really their opportunity to tell us, and it's our responsibility to be open to it. This is Eric Carter's work, 2019. I think graphics help us the visual image of understanding the relationships, whether it's exclusion or segregation. What an interesting way of othering. In the spirit of trying to create belonging, how do we give access to people who have been denied access? Well, we forced it through a legal system. It too backfired a bit. Yes, we made some progress. We have some small gains that came back in that period of time. And look where we are. We're still systemically challenged here. Integration, inclusion, and ultimately belonging. What I think that image on the right hand shows us is that, the ability to recognize that we are only whole when we are in acceptance of all that has potential. And since potential is always something we're adding into our wholeness, we're never done. So this is a very dynamic process that we're talking about if we want to experience belonging. This is from that book I was talking about, Belonging Without Othering. Uh, and I like the way that Stephen speaks about the and. Belonging is both perceptual. Am I perceiving my experience? Are others perceiving the environment this way? Am I seeing the other in this way? It's perceptual and it's tangible. What actions, what behaviors, what conditions have me name something in my experience as belonging? It's both a feeling and a practice. And of course, it is also subjective and objective. It's a big arena to play in. All right, this is a little more heady. And you're all going to get the notes, all right? But I thought that I would share a little bit in attempting to identify or measure belonging. There are a couple of instruments that have come out. But the minute we make it only objective and we start to have a debate about what makes it valid, we are now in the land of bias. We're either in confirmation bias or we're in emotional bias. And so I think instruments are difficult. So instead, what Stephen and John did was try to say, what are the elements that would help us to recognize a state of belonging emerging, maybe occurring, but always emerging. Here's the first one. Belonging encompasses and requires inclusion, and to some extent, equity as well. And so this is that notion. There's a wonderful graphic that has been out on the internet for, I don't know, as long as I've been an adult, where you have three kids looking over the fence, and one is up on a four-step ladder, and the other is standing on the ground. So when we recognize that everybody has a different starting point, we accept responsibility in our act of inclusion to say, what's everybody's starting place without the necessity to evaluate whether that's a good or a bad thing. It simply is. Acknowledge it. Just like diversity is a fact, disequity is a fact. If for no other reason than I grew up in the southern hemisphere that has been really damaged by the excess exploitation of the northern hemisphere. Somebody said to me the other day, what does climate change have to do with racism? And I looked at them and I said, that's interesting. Has a lot to do. Has a lot to do. A sense of connection with the emphasis on sense that generally comes with an emotional valence. You're sensing attachment, you're sensing fondness, you're sensing safety, maybe you're sensing warmth. So translating connection into the qualities that people viscerally are experiencing. The third is visibility or recognition. I don't know, I might argue with them and say it probably should be an and. It's not enough to be visible in a place if my presence and contribution isn't also recognized. So in some ways, this is also a predicate with connection, and it's reciprocal with connection. If I'm visible and I'm welcome into the space, I'm much more likely to make a contribution that has the potential to be recognized. Now, the last is agency. And this is where we bring power into the equation. One of the greatest difficulties we have inside of organizations to help leaders understand. Well, I didn't do anything to disempower them. Well, I realize that was your intent. However, the experience that people are having as they're reflecting it back to you would indicate that your intention and your actions are not compatible. Well, but what do I do about that? Well, you make them compatible. Well, how do I do that? And now we got to go all the way back up to the top. Where does that leader in their nature and nurture and development as a leader not believe in inclusion? Where do they not believe in the diversity of equity? Where do they not believe they have responsibility to create an environment for connection? Where do they accept responsibility for creating visibility and recognition for those who are coming up behind them? So agency is both at an individual level and a collective level. So it's policy and practice, and it's about the power to act and the potential to influence. Um, we talk a lot about the fact that 55% of the global workforce is now age 30 and under. That means this is Generation Z and Gen Alpha, and they're all digital natives working for 45 to 60-year-olds who are not, who are still on the coattails of a command and control environment. Well, what does command and control say? What have you done for me lately? So visibility and recognition is a function of your activity. And you might have paper authority to act, but the consequences to act in the organization are not welcoming of your different your different way of working. Yes, this is why we say, multi-generational workplaces are having struggle. Well, they're having struggle for these four elements and the way leaders are defining how does somebody gain agency inside this organization. But wait, doesn't every individual have agency? Of course. Not if they find themselves excluded and they haven't been given a leg up for what is not fairness in the equity experience, all bets are off. This is why we see turnover in this generation on average 2.6 to 3.4 years. When I was working, I was told you want to make sure that you stay in a role for at least 8 to 10 years if you're going to get a good job in your next promotion. Well, that's out the window. So it is a multidimensional, multifaceted subject that we're talking about here. So let's layer on psychological safety for a moment. And I think most of you have been exposed and just kind of looking at the participant list to the concept of psychological safety. Amy Edmondson, of course, is well noted for this. I have a little bit of preference to Tim Clark's language about rewarded vulnerability, but they're both going in the same door. I've given you the social exchange definition for each of the phases. The first one is inclusion. Inclusion in exchange for human status and the absence of harm. This might be another way of saying connection. And then stage two is learner, which is the encouragement to team in exchange for engagement to learn. Let me be part of this so I can learn about the next innovation in the company. People are always competing to see, can I get in on that initiative, which has clearly got priority in the organization, because then I'll be visible and I'll get recognized as somebody who's a high potential in the organization. There isn't anything wrong with all of that unless we are excluding people who have the polish but not or sorry, excluding the people who don't have the polish but have the production because they're not visible and recognized. Just giving you an example here. Contribution. And remember, without connection and the opportunities to grow that inclusion and learner provide, we don't get to contribution. And of course, everybody wants to be a challenger, but contribution is the experience of autonomy. In other words, I am given permission to act. I have authority to use my competency in the organization. And I accept responsibility to deliver results. So, what does it take for us to, as leaders and managers, to loosen our grip on oversight and to demonstrate to our personnel, we see your competence and we give you the authority to act. Go forth. And oh, by the way, this is what success looks like. Yeah, that's often a missing piece. And another reason why people don't give themselves permission to speak, they stay in silence. So you never get to challenger, which is that you believe that the people that you are standing with will give you air cover in exchange for your candor. So here's something I'd like us to have a little conversation about, anybody that would like to. Where do your people get stuck and why? Whether you are a coach with to external companies, an external coach to companies, an internal coach, a leader, a manager, whatever it is, where do your people, that constellation, get stuck? And why does it happen? So, floor's open. Thought I'd take a few shares and see what's bubbling up for you. I'll put it in chat for you too. Lynn, you look like you were nodding along. What's coming up for you? Can I call on you?
Sure. I was actually just still reflecting on if you could say a little bit more, Janet, about what do you mean by air cover? I didn't quite grasp that.
That no matter the comment, your candid remarks in a session, that your colleagues will say, huh, it never occurred to me to think about it like that. What's behind that? Because I want to learn what it is that you're seeing that I've never seen before.
Right. So some curiosity, leaning in rather than deflection or ignoring. Yeah.
Yes. Or worse yet, shutting it down. That's not relevant. It doesn't belong here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is out of discomfort, right? The receiver is uncomfortable with the question, and yet that's really what we're saying we want. We need the contrarian points of view. That was the whole point behind diversity, is to have a representation in our company of the people that we serve so that we could serve them more consistently across the diversity that is our customer base. I mean, just a fundamental premise back in the 80s of trying to build diversity in the workforce.
Yeah.
So
So you bring to mind a really great example now if you were looking for some I've seen this pattern in myself participating in teams in different circles of being a truth speaker, and then there's that it lands like lead, or ignore
the
or
dead
move on.
silence.
Yeah. And then on the break, two or three people come to me and say, "Don't tell anybody, but that really resonated with me, what you said." But they don't support openly, but they will give some kind of feedback that it was important or meaningful for them. And I've often had that pattern in experience, and it leaves me dumbfounded about what to do about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. I'm sure if we asked for a show of hands, we would see everybody's hand go up. And of course, this is where why I think so passionately about the application of coaching into leadership, because the leader who can recognize when that dead spot moment happens and choose to lean in to say, what just happened? Yes, that's a very different point of view we just heard. And is that not the seed of what we're seeking to accomplish? Right? Without the evaluation, this is the piece as humans. Can we transcend the need to make it right or wrong? This is the dualistic thinking that gets us in trouble. If we can say, yes, it is. That's an element of what's going on here. And what else is going on here? What's moving us? What by our actions are we prioritizing? What are we dismissing? What's the consequence of dismissing it? That's the rich dialogue that's necessary. It's not the merits of the idea as good or bad. It's the existence of another truth. Multiple truths can coexist. Now, I realize that's a pretty open mindset. And oftentimes it's 9 months, 12 months, 15 months working with a leader before they finally realize, oh, this is why my team doesn't initiate in the way I want them to. I'm signaling that I'm not available for their version of initiating. Hmm. Now, with that insight, what would you shift in the way you're behaving? So this is what I would call being generative, that our focus is on the we, not just the internal view I have, but the ripple effect. When I believe in this way, I behave in that way, and it produces not quite the result I want. Well, let me back up. What would I have to believe in order to behave in a different way to produce a different result? Hence why reflection is so bloody important in this work, because we cannot see beyond our habits unless we pause them. And we need to hit the circuit breaker. How many of you know about the reticular activating system? Have you been Some of you? Yes, no? So neurobiologically, we're predisposed to habit. And this is an energy conservation for us. So if you want to change, you have to see that you have a habit first, and then be able to say, it's not producing what I want. Okay, I'm going to intentionally pay attention to when my habit gets activated and pause myself. Okay, I can do it. I can be trustworthy to stop my habit. All right, what do you want to replace it with? And train your reticular activating system to pay attention to a different filter so that it activates a new behavior. It's not that we have a habit and have things that go into the unconscious to give us energy conservation. That's the problem. It's that we don't pay attention that when the conditions are different, when the environment is different, it calls for a different filter. That's on us as humans to accept responsibility for that shift. And this is where coaching and working with leaders who want to apply the coaching skills to recognize that that's the first step is for them to go through that habit change process so they can see the opportunity when it shows up with their teams. Anybody else want to say anything?
Hey, Miss Janet.
Hey, how are you? Gosh, it's
Very
been
good.
forever.
Kevin Hawks here, your former favorite student.
Yes.
You can't see, but I have my entire team here
Oh,
from Amazon.
that's
When we saw this class, we definitely felt that this was definitely for us. Full
fantastic.
disclosure, our guardrails are inclusion and belonging. And since you and I have been in session together, I've taken over this wonderful global team of
Mm.
operations leaders.
Uh-huh.
And what you just said, when you said, where do you or your team get stuck? And you know, Amazon is steeped in tradition. And so this team of phenomenal, can y'all show the camera? All right, I got to show
There
you
you
this team.
go.
You are part of putting this
Hey.
together. All right. All right. And there's many more on my side. The point I'm trying to make, and there's a couple more online, is we just had a summit where we talked about thinking big
Mm.
and how big can we think and not creating false ceilings for ourselves, right? Because if we want different, we have to do different. And different is upon us now. For me, I think big all the time, but I can't be the only one. So, how do I pour enough in each leader's cup so they'll have that energy and feel empowered and emboldened to think big with me? Because that's how we grow together. I don't want to run up the hill by myself. And I have very capable people around me. So definitely thank you for putting this on. You know, we're going to come to this one and the next one as a team. because that's what we feel is important for us as we move future.
That's beautiful. Thanks for the inspiration, Kevin. That's wonderful. And, congratulations on your success. And I think your question is a good one because I rewrote your statement a little differently. We used to call these tweetables. If you want different, we must choose differently, right? It's not just do different and be different. We must choose. This is a really important component of belonging because it's both feeling and practice. And the feeling state is what motivates the choice. We must choose to see that the experience we are creating and that we are being influenced by isn't what we want. So, what do we want instead is a question we have to answer before we practice something different. So, yes, envision big. Don't put a ceiling on what's possible. One of my other favorite clients is here, and one of the things that he's working on is how do we create a friction-free flow? Even though there's tremendous difference in the cultures amongst the different parts of the organization. Well, it starts with noticing where the friction is. I have to be courageous to accept that there's places of discomfort and without shying away from it. Oh, I don't want disharmony, but instead leaning into it to say, there is the seed of the next evolution. Can we, to Lynn's point, can we get curious? Can we lean in? Can we invite people to say, this is what I want instead? And ultimately, this is not a one and done, folks. This is an ongoing experience because as humans, we're always changing. And the minute we think we've figured it out, you're going to get an experience right in front of you that says, oh, I totally missed that piece. And to be okay with that, to have some grace with those moments when we don't find our way. All right. Janet, was there something you wanted to add? I just saw you nodding there.
No, I was just agreeing that just when you think you have it handled, there's something else that pops up to challenge you.
Yeah.
I'm been a night person for life,
Uh-huh.
and I most recently listened to what they call a short cast about becoming a day person and all of the advantages, not only productivity wise, but health wise, and becoming a day person. So now I have redefined myself as transitioning into a morning lark as opposed to being a night owl.
Oh, that's so wonderful.
It's not easy because it's going against everything I stand for, but in the long run it'll be better for me.
Well, and what a beautiful demonstration of the quote I put there. Real leadership begins the moment you're willing to learn out loud. And you just gave us all the great gift of no matter how much we have embraced a particular practice and it's become our preference and we make assumptions and apply bias to our situations because of it, we still have the power of choice, right? Sovereignty is all about accepting responsibility for an inner authority to choose how we relate to our conditions of life. Whether you do that through your value system or a set of principles or whatever methodology you've adopted, a philosophy perhaps in your life, you constructed it, which means you can deconstruct it and you can reconstruct it. As Janet has just said, she's got what did you say? I'm an in transition day person.
Yes.
Oh gosh, you'll have to tell me how that's going. I admire your courage. Good work.
Thank you.
And she's also modeling humility as a cultural strategy. What we recognize is that leaders who can stand humbly in the face of difficulty, challenges, breakdown, failures, emotionality, risk, calamity, trauma, they are going to recover far faster from failure by being with what is, without the need to evaluate right and wrong. There is always a place for that. This will build resilience because it focuses the energy on how to contribute and ultimately delivers engagement that produces the innovation that all organizations are seeking all the time. That means we're leading to learn. We're always learning. And that many of you know this story of generative for me really came from asking leaders, how is it that you've been able to sustain excellence all these years? And they couldn't answer the question. The obvious key performance indicators of producing results was there, but they really didn't understand how are they wired for success. And learning is key. One leader in particular that always comes to mind for me, he just looked at me and he said, I realize that I will never know as much as there is to know in the world. So it's my job to go after things I know nothing about, to see if there's something there that would benefit this organization and our customers. And he said, the minute I put myself in a place of discomfort to learn something I know nothing about, I get ideation. I start to get new ideas. And I don't have to tell anybody all the ideas in my head, but they keep me engaged. And now I'm listening into the organization to see, oh, there are some possibilities for this idea. Let me bring a team of people together and see what we might create. That's the last one, experimentation. So learning, original thinking, and creating, making tangible through experimentation are all the predicates to producing sustaining excellence. Now, I happen to think it also requires that we are able to create out loud with each other. And that's not going to happen in an environment that is not producing an experience of belonging. People will hold back, which is why we have psychological safety, right? In some ways, this term and the phases are a little bit rearview mirror, trying to figure out why we don't have more friction-free zones in our organizations. Well, I think it's these three: learning and originating and creating. I also know out of my own experience that what we avoid in ourselves, the places that feel a little uncomfortable to admit, we suppress it in others. We don't want to see it in somebody else because it makes us uncomfortable. And culture is a mirror that we must look into. Your teams, your colleagues, your customers are always reflecting back to you who you're being and whether you are absolutely creating the conditions for belonging to occur. It's never going to be a manual to read. So these are some questions. I'm going to leave you with them. We're not going to work these today, but these are ones on a regular basis to inventory. What's getting rewarded in our organization? What gets punished, even if it's quietly? Um, when I moved to the Northwest, I got told, watch out for the Northwest nice. And I kind of went, the Northwest nice? What are you talking about? And to me, the parallel was in the South, where they would say, oh, well, aren't you precious? Well, and what they really wanted to say was, what were you thinking? Northwest nice is very similar. People will smile and say, oh, that's interesting. And you won't get anything more, but what they're thinking in the thought bubble is, wow, that's just not going to work here. This poor thing, she's going to have to figure this out by failing. Oh my gosh, the lost productivity in the organization if somebody would have just told me directly what was not going to work and why they thought that was so. And of course, what's never said yet is always felt. It's always felt. If we can remember that as leaders, we'll pause for a moment when we notice that somebody has disengaged. All right, I'm going to give you some quiet time. And there's 5 questions here. You can work with all of them if you wish. The key in this quiet time is choose depth over polish. Don't get the wording right. Don't worry. You're not going to show it to anybody. You are going to get a chance to share it and talk about it, whatever feels safe for you. But for this exercise, just take out a piece of paper and jot some notes if that's the way you do it. Put some keywords down that help you to connect with the meaning of the question. Where in your workplace do you feel the strongest sense of belonging and why? Belonging, as we described, the four elements of connection and visibility and recognition and inclusion and agency. Where do you feel the need to shrink, adapt, or edit yourself to be accepted? Oh my God, I'll never forget. I said it to the CMO. Maybe I should just start being stupid at work and it would be better. She got so mad at me. Oh my gosh, I was like so taken aback. And she said, don't you ever be anybody less than who you are. It was a really important lesson. It wasn't about being stupid. It was about my sensitivity to how people were receiving me and making space to stop being the only smart person in the room. Hard one to learn, but a really important one. What signals tell you that authenticity is either safe or risky in your culture? Safe or risky? Those are evaluative terms. So think about the consequence side. The consequence of safety is acceptance, perhaps, or visibility and recognition, perhaps, or reward, perhaps. Risky is being identified as a renegade. I happen to have fallen in love with my renegade. It will always be there. But it wasn't always, and it was risky. Now, the good news is, if you like risk, you're going to get lots of opportunities to do risky things. And it has its upside. And with that comes the responsibility that that won't be so for everybody that you're with. So, what will you prioritize to create connection with people for whom that's difficult? Where have you seen someone's uniqueness truly celebrated, not just tolerated? I'm an entrepreneur today because it was tolerated for 14 years. And amazing opportunities. But the truth was, I wasn't meant to be in that system anymore. I'd outgrown it. How many times do organizations lose top talent because they've missed the signals? A consequence of not belonging. And what's one moment you still carry, positive or painful, that defined your experience of fitting in? Okay, I'm going to leave the slide up so that you have reference to it, and now just give you some time quietly to jot some notes. And if you have questions, you can put them in chat for me. And well, did you have fun? Good, 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 good. Mm. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. Terrific. All right, let me just give you a little bit of context and we'll open the floor for some comments and questions. This is what we think the real ROI of cultural courage is. And that's the outcome of a cultural audit and choosing the work we were describing about noticing habits and preferences and short-circuiting them so that you can consider a new filter you might want that will strengthen how you experience and how you create the conditions for others to experience belonging. What we see in our work is that organizations that prioritize wholeness experience increased employee retention, higher innovation rates, stronger team trust, greater emotional resilience, and measurable productivity gains. In fact, I'd argue all of these are measurable. Remembering making success measurable is everything from what might be familiar as key performance indicator metrics, but they can also be the way we are experiencing things, before and an after. And it's important that we spend some time doing that. Now, some of you are not old enough to maybe remember who Peter Drucker is, but forever he has said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I do it a little bit differently when I talk to our customers about this. And I say, culture isn't soft. It's actually a strategic multiplier. And So as you were in your conversations, how does the way we're thinking here about the real ROI match up with what you all talked about? And the floor is open. Creating out loud, it really does make a difference. Karen, nice to see you. Jean, are you feeling shy? That's not how I've noticed.
I guess I was. Like, do you know, it was the I hadn't seen your work, Jen. I know your work is so phenomenal, and it's just a delight to be in your presence again. So thank you. Um, and I think the one thing that stood out for me was that the shrinking, that
Mm.
shrinking concept. That one was the one of the 5 questions that really grabbed me. And is there a choicefulness around shrinking? Like sometimes I'm not necessarily going to shrink, but I'm not really choosing to participate because I'm not going to lose my authenticity. I'm not going to, it's not worth it for me to
Yeah.
enter in. So I'm just curious, maybe off topic, but I'm super curious about your thoughts around that.
No, I think it's very on topic.
Mm.
In fact, that's what Hamad and I were talking about while you guys were in breakout room.
Oh,
I think that I think this is true for people that at moment to moment we make a decision about what level of discomfort we'll tolerate.
yeah.
All right. So there's a consistent evaluating process going on, which is why challenger psychological safety practically doesn't exist.
Yeah.
There is no such thing as there's no consequence for what I'm about to say. In our minds, right? We have our own evaluation of what the cultural norms are and where we will or won't be crossing an invisible boundary because we
Mm-hmm.
always can feel it in our gut instinct or in the intuition in our heart that, oh boy, if I roll this grenade onto the table, that's going to be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that's why I'm an entrepreneur because like I need to be able to roll grenades.
Yeah, yeah. Value that freedom. Yeah.
And the question I think underneath your question is at what cost?
Mm-hmm.
At what psychic cost? At what emotional cost? At
Mm-hmm.
what aspirational cost? And when do we hit the wall? We might make that decision that we're going to exit the organization and go someplace else. We're just going to repeat history because what's the
Mm-hmm.
common denominator? It's me.
Mm-hmm.
So I either choose to deal with it in that moment or I'm going to repeat history someplace else.
Right.
So then the question becomes, all right, it hasn't been worth it to me to speak my mind and to risk the consequences that I'm making up in my head. What's one step removed from it? So if I were coaching you and we were having this conversation, I might say, what relationship in the organization do you value so much that you would take the risk to say something a little contradictory?
Mm-hmm.
What would
Mm-hmm.
you say? What would you want to ask that person? Now, here's the generative piece in our program, Conversation Made Better. The generative way to have that conversation is to say, I wonder, um, what else have you considered, uh, but didn't take the risk to put on the table around this initiative?
Right.
If there were no consequences, you would have added to that conversation. In this, you begin with the invitation to the other to
Mm-hmm.
explore the thing you're not saying out loud either, to create the
Mm-hmm.
space for you both to have that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Because until we bust the myth that we don't belong or that our ideas will be rejected, that there will be a negative consequence to our employment, our security, the whatever's on our risk profile, until we bust that myth, we're not going to learn how to do it.
Yeah. Got it. It's interesting because I was holding the word shrink as that I had a choice beyond it. But really the truth was is that was me not feeling belonging.
Yeah,
Yeah. Funny.
exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're pointing to part of the reason that it's so difficult to try to adjudicate belonging by policy. It's not that policy is good or bad, that we should or shouldn't have policy. That's not the point. The policy is just like scaffolding. You still have to do the work to build the building. And that happens in every single conversation, and in particular, the ones that make it safe for people to recognize, ooh, ouch, that hurt. I'm sorry. What do I learn here? And this is the work that takes a lot of courage on the part of the leader who's giving that to another leader, on the part of an employee who's recognizing, oh, I didn't see that with my colleague and is getting the feedback, to the HR person or the HRBP who's working with leaders who refuse to accept responsibility for giving direct feedback, that without it perpetuates the storytelling about what is and isn't acceptable to be included and visible. I could keep going for hours, right? Um, but that's where the real work is. Can we move to a more generative stance rather than the evaluative stance that allows curiosity to move to wonder? And from wonder, we engage the other so that we can learn how they see their world. Without that, we can't make new choices. We won't, right?
Conformity.
Exactly.
Beautiful. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Anybody else? Kevin, I'm dying to know, how did your team experience it? Are you still here? Maybe not. I might have had to go. All right. Wanted to just give you a quick glimpse, as Jean said, wondering about our body of work. I've mentioned the Conversations Made Better. This is a program that we wrote really to address this question. What does it mean in daily interactions to stand in our authentic wholeness, to be sovereign, and to not compromise another's dignity in the process? And so that program is the place to begin, um, one conversation at a time. We also run a version of that program, which is for leadership, to begin to examine what are they choosing in the way they are modeling that might be creating an environment that is not producing the quality of belonging that they are seeking to have. And ultimately, what is it to be a generative leader? Managers applying this, we do some coaching on their learning to accelerate implementing a new way of going. And we firmly believe that the foundation of coaching, as done through the certification program for level 1, is a great beginning for leaders. You just heard Kevin say it, which is why I was asking him to comment. Um, and the team from Amazon went through in 2022, and clearly are still rolling it forward. That's the beautiful thing about being a coach and creating more coaches in the world, is that we're creating an exponential ripple effect to help people restore a sense of authenticity and wholeness and sovereignty. And obviously, we've been in the coaching ed certification business since the very beginning of the ICF's work in that arena in 1999, and just love doing it. So, level 1, 2, and 3, as well as generative team coaching certification. And we're running a little special. I just felt like everybody was needing some time to go in and remember who they are, and fall in love again with themselves and their professional work in the world. And that's our program called Authentic Self-Presence. And so I decided to make it a little less expensive, and it wasn't in our rotation for this year. So I just decided to add it back in. So if that's for you, give me a call. And here's my parting comment for you. Culture is what happens when no one is looking. Be the kind of leader who shapes what happens next. You really don't need permission. Now, hopefully you got a start on an intention statement. Keep working it. Write it down, make it visible, circle it, give it a sun with the glowing rays coming from the center. Keep it close. You've already started it today, so keep it going. And keep coming back. We're not going to do a master class in August because everybody said we're on vacation. Like, okay, so have fun in August. Happy summer. But we'll be back in September. And we're going to do a little work around middle manager malaise with Gen Z. Just to give you a little tease. We'll see y'all all then. And until then, be safe, be kind. Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank
Okay.
you
Jen.
so much,
you,
Janet.
Thank you, Janet.
Janet.
Really
Thanks.
great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I'm sorry I joined late.
You'll get the recording, Nancy. It's okay. Did you get the handout?
Yes, I got that. So thank you. I just thought it was 3 p.m., not 2 p.m. So I will go back and listen because you always have great work. So I was excited to finally have it on my calendar. I even moved meetings for it.
Oh my gosh. Sorry, Nancy.
Yeah, it's been one of those days, but it's okay. It's great to see you. Great stuff.
Likewise. Take care now.
You too. Bye-bye.
Hey, Renee, did you have a question or?